So I got Celeste at the recommendation of a friend, and I'm playing it right now while I'm waiting for Crash Bandicoot 4 to download. You know, I've been saying for a while that I'm going to start playing, more indie games. And this one provides a compelling argument for me doing that very thing. 20 minutes into this game, I am in love with it. The soundtrack, the gameplay, the visuals of it, this is just... I gotta play some more of these. Is Manifold Garden any good? It looks cool, but, enough about that. Let's play some AAAs. Here we go. Welcome back. Now, the last time we took a pretty broad look at the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I, and I'm sure some other people as well, had some doubts about going into it, but it ended up being really awesome. And I know some of the story beats kind of threw me for a loop a little bit with the alternate timelines and Nexus of Creation and all that kind of stuff, the time ghosts. But if you think about it, the plot of fighting your enemy at the Nexus of Creation to resurrect your dead allies and alter the timeline isn't all that out of place within the broader Final Fantasy pantheon. That storyline's not really all that much stranger than, doing battle with your warlock brother using the powers of light and darkness, who summons an ancient giant robot to fight you at the behest of a sorcerer who you fly a whale to the moon to fight, or embarking on a pilgrimage to permanently destroy the reincarnating spirit of your estranged father who, like you, of course, was resurrected 1,000 years after both of your actual deaths, or becoming embroiled in an ages-old conflict between two biomechanical gods of two different worlds, all ending in a conflict against a duality of gods whose simultaneous purpose is to both save humans from and sacrifice humans to the literal personification of the Norse end of the world, who, as it turns out, is comprised of two people you've been adventuring with the entire game. You gotta love Final Fantasy XIII. But anyhow, we're here tonight to talk a little bit more about the music specifically in this game. There's some awesome stuff here, and even if this game had been a total bomb, it still would have been worth it, just for the music.
So I don't think I'd say that this is my favorite game soundtrack of all time. No. Gravity Rush 2 probably still holds that title, and there's a few others vying for it, but this one is hella good. And even if it isn't my favorite, they did some really, really cool things with this soundtrack that I've never really heard a game do before, with the exception of a few Zelda games in their closing moments, which we'll definitely get to. But for now, let's examine this masterpiece of the game soundtrack a little bit more closely.
So last time, we ended off talking about iconography in video games, which is a thing in many other mediums, but in video games it's almost more so, because you have imagery, music, dialogue, and potentially even gameplay all working in tandem. And you might say, well, how can gameplay contain iconography? Well, here's a pretty good example. Remember the first time you played God of War 4? And then they tell you, R1 and R2 are the attack buttons. And if you're like me, you immediately went into the options to see if there was any recourse to right this horrible wrong. And you find the classic controls, you set them up, and so when you get the Blades of Chaos later in the game, you're playing the game, and you're like, holy shit, the old combos work. That's the best example I can think of.
Anyways, it isn't the musical callbacks that make this game's soundtrack special. It's a remake. Of course that was going to happen. There have to have been dozens of Final Fantasy concerts over the years, and many of them have sported 7's legendary soundtrack. We've heard Orchestral 7 music many times before. What takes this one above and beyond are the dynamic permutations they take these tried and true tunes through. I couldn't believe my ears as I was playing through this first leg of the game.
So yeah, they reorchestrated the music. When I was a kid, I thought that real reorchestration, not, cheap, MIDI, uncanny valley of sound, which I promise does exist and we will talk about it. I thought that that was the best possible thing that you could do with video games. And they did that here, and it sounds so good. It sounds better than I ever could have hoped. But as if that wasn't enough for Nobuo and the rest of the musical whizzes at Square, and I guess it wasn't, they went way further with it than just that. So let's just go straight down the list and talk about everything crazy cool that happened here.
We already talked about the opening and how awesome that was. Then right away the bombing mission starts and Cloud flips off the train and this awesome rendition of the classic tune Bombing Mission plays. And it's perfect, because this is the only note-for-note remake you're going to hear for a while, because it's also one of the only one-to-one remakes story-wise. When you finally hear what you think is the battle theme, it evolves into something else. When I heard how much color and contrary motion was in this version, I legitimately teared up. I thought this is what you'd be hearing through the game, but no, this is just the version you hear during this little tutorial battle. The tension in this harmonization is deliberately there as a means of signifying that you, the player, are still transitioning into the game. As if the musical goodies in the actual soundtrack weren't enough, as you go through the game, you'll come across people playing music from their personal phonographs. All of these songs are additional remixes of various songs from Final Fantasy VII, some of which occur during the original game's Midgar arc, and some of which occur from places beyond Midgar, like Cosmo Canyon or Costa del Sol.
One of my favorite things about playing a video game remake is seeing what they did with the soundtrack. I don't know what it is, but it just seems like every time a video game gets remade or remastered, it's got this real beloved soundtrack. It's kind of like when the Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and 2.5 re-releases came out. I was really on the fence about dropping a bunch of money on games that I'd already played, even though they were the final mix versions. It wasn't until I heard Sinister Shadows, the song that plays during the Battle with Thousand Heartless, and I heard it redone with the orchestra, and it sounded exactly the way I always imagined it would as a kid. That's when I was like, oh yeah, I'm buying these.
But anyways, some of these jukebox tunes are fairly standard, like Costa del Sol and The Gold Saucer, which sound more or less like their original versions. But others, like the Bombing Mission, give you something completely different. You'll walk up to this jukebox, you'll hear this crazy free jazz solo blowing over the rhythm section. You buy the disc, and you're like, wait, this is the Bombing Mission. And then it'll evolve into the tune you recognize. I've never heard a game do avant-garde jazz this much justice. Or check out this version of Lurking in the Darkness. You know, that tune that plays when you're bebopping around in the tunnels in the original game? This version of The Oppressed might be my favorite remix of all, and sounds like it could have been plucked right off a 50s hard bop album. Who would have expected that, on top of the awesomeness of this soundtrack, there would be a whole sub-soundtrack of live jazz? They even pulled some tunes that didn't come from the original game, like this one, the choral tune from Advent Children. With the good, though, we gotta take the not so good. For me, the re-instrumentation of certain tunes was hit and miss. Like, for example, the MIDI vibraphone in the original Final Fantasy VII was such a distinctive sound in the game. It lent it this feeling of being very rustic and modern simultaneously. But we mostly think of vibes as a jazz thing nowadays, so for the most part, in the orchestral stuff it got replaced on the new soundtrack. Like, check out the initial version of Aerith's theme. Or the Game Over screen. For the record, I love both versions of the soundtrack. It all sounds fabulous, but the absence of vibes took some getting used to. This is also a little off topic, although this technically has to do with audio, But while I'm talking about hit and miss things, I gotta mention the recastings. I mean, I was definitely disappointed that they didn't bring back Quentin Flynn for Reno, who played him in Advent Children and Crisis Core, because he looked similar to Axel of Kingdom Hearts, and fun fact, their Japanese voice actors were also the same. I feel like a while ago I read something about Namura thinking of them as parallel universe versions of each other or something, but for the most part, I really enjoyed the new performances in this game. For some reason, the new Sephiroth voice reading just didn't hit my ears right.
Oh, you need not remind me.
And maybe that's just because all my life, the same guy, George Newbern, played him. Yeah, he had a different voice actor in Kingdom Hearts 1, I think, but it was the same guy in Kingdom Hearts 2, in both Dissidia games, in Advent Children Complete, Crisis Core 2, some of which, especially Crisis Core, were definitive takes on the villain. So like, this was the Sephiroth. Like seriously, why not bring him back? And the readings he would give were so distinctive. Like this perfect combo of vindictive, condescending, crazy, well aware of how powerful he is. I mean, his reincarnation and the fight between him and Cloud in Advent Children is still one of the coolest things of all time. You say what you want about that movie, but don't tell me that that fight and the version of One Winged Angel that played during it weren't awesome. Don't tell me you didn't get chills when Cloud heard his deep, creepy voice, saw Sephiroth's terrifying visage glowering at him, and you see the literal terror in Cloud's eyes, like, please, not again, not him, and you hear the One Winged Angel come on, and immediately you break out in goosebumps and rewind the scene 20 times. Don't tell me that you didn't. Don't. Back to the topic at hand, though. The music in this game never stops evolving. This is one of the coolest things I've ever heard any soundtrack do, in a game or otherwise. The song's layered, by which I mean a song that you recognize will kind of start up and you'll go, oh, I'm kind of bummed they didn't put all the parts I recognize in there. Then as the battle goes on, the music will shift, more parts will get added, and you'll think, wait, did I hear that before? And before you know it, the music will blossom into the full-fledged, completely done remake that you remember it as, and you won't know what to do with yourself.
You are going to be beside yourself with the agony of sitting there at 3 a.m. and not having anybody to talk to about these games. And it's going to get even worse the next day when you try to bring this shit up to your friends and they don't play these games, so you're basically talking to yourself anyway.
The transformative and interwoven nature of this soundtrack is such that if I sat here and gave you a full analysis of everything that goes on with it, you'd be watching a video that went on for hours. Either that, or an entire video series on this one game. And as much as I enjoyed it, I really want to play some other ones too. So, I'm going to give you two detailed examples to demonstrate, just to let you see how much depth there actually is going on in the soundtrack. Let's examine Chapter 1, the bombing mission, which is actually what the original song for this level is literally called. Someone once told me, many years ago, that the thing people generally remember about most stuff is the beginning and the end. That would certainly seem to be the case with Final Fantasy VII, as this opening is one of the most famous in video game history at this point. The level starts up like you'd expect. Avalanche takes out some soldiers, Cloud flips off the train, you fight the soldiers and dogs, etc., etc. Like I mentioned, the music is mostly one-to-one, although where the original track looped back, they decided to add a canon segment based on Cloud's theme, otherwise known as the main theme of Final Fantasy VII, which is based off a simple 5-note motif that's more or less the fanfare of the entire game. This is something you experience a lot playing this game. Even though the story is centered only on the events of the original Midgar arc, there's music from many places in the game beyond, and not just on the jukebox. So you get to the reactor, and a one-to-one remake of the original reactor music plays. That's cool, right? Well, guess what? It's about to get cooler. When Barrett joins the combat and the music shifts to the fight music, you might notice that there isn't a hard stop between the two tracks.
To the planet's core.
That's because the fight music here is basically an overlay. That is, instead of the background music stopping for a new track to take its place, more instruments, rhythms, and texture get added over the top. And so for that reason, you can still hear the original melody. Isn't that rad? It's kind of like in Jak 1 and 2, where in the first game, depending on who you talk to or where you are, different elements get added to the music. And in the second game, depending on the enemy configuration and your equipment, stuff gets added. It's awesome. I always loved hearing it because it's such a perfect modular example of what it is that can make game music so special and distinct from other genres. It's the same thing here. So when you fight the Scorpion, if you're a veteran of the OG game, you'll notice that what plays is this awesome, highly dramatic remix of the boss theme. You might recognize it from the commercial. But listen a little closer at certain parts, and you'll hear the bombing mission theme interwoven with the boss theme.
The hell is that?
A barrier? Never seen this defense system. Bingo! Focus on the core.
Oh, now he remembers. Don't keep me waiting in suspense next time.
This alone is excellent. The bosses in this game do this awesome thing where they progress through these cinematic stages, where not only their appearance and moveset, but the strategies you have to use in order to beat them change, and the music changes along with them. Towards the end of this fight, when the Scorpion starts going haywire, the music shifts toward harmonic instability, which to our ears sounds like symmetrical scales like the whole tone, or the octatonic, for example.
Alright. Strike now, before it fires again!
Isn't it weird that symmetrical scales sound less stable? So it blows up, and as you're escaping, you hear one last remix, a much more frantic version of the bombing mission. So, as we can see, the music builds and evolves as the level progresses. Let's take a look at another one of my favorite examples. At this part in the game, you're making your heroic climb into the Shinra headquarters to rescue Aerith. At this part, you hear an entirely new tune. I can't claim to have seen everything in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, but this tune is new to my ears. Weirdly, it's an F sharp, which is a half step up tonally from F minor, where the key of the battle theme sits. It makes the sound here hotter as the story comes to a head, which, makes sense. As you progress and you get into the combat, the layering thing will happen again, and you'll hear that what you're actually listening to is this really epic orchestral tune. As you near your goal, it'll evolve into something even more pumping, with this new backbeat that gets added, and a stronger, more prominent pulse. When you get attacked by the Valkyrie, the same robot that tried to take you out on the elevator escape in the original game, the modulation really hit my ears hard.
That was close.
It's not done with us yet.
Yeah, I hear you.
Rising into a new key is a classic way to give your music an uplifting bent, and it's been done everywhere from superhero movies to the church. And when you think the excitement is over and the group stop and reflect on their journey so far, what key do we return to? Well, it's around F, although the music here dances through a few different key areas, but the consistent presence of a few certain notes suggests either F minor or some key close to it. The progression here is really interesting and really beautiful. Then, the ending, of course, where you hear the motif that's been developed this whole time on that wistful French horn.
And there's still more.
So that's it for my big set-piece level-based examples. Let's look at some smaller cases of evolving music. Sometimes, just when your ears can't take it anymore, and you think you've heard everything that this game could possibly offer you sonically, something else will happen. When you finally fight the Airbuster after this long build-up, you'll hear the boss music start up, but this time, instead of the drama-filled orchestration that you hear at the start, you'll hear one that sounds like rock, like the original. Complete with the same syncopated drum set part, and some sick fills added in, the electric guitar going off, all the melodies and harmonies from the original. And you'll be like, I would have been content with the first version. I didn't need two. I can't handle two. And then the orchestra comes in. And then, as the boss battle heats up, the choir comes in too.
Buzz off.
How are you even human if you're still focused on the fight at this point? All of this in the background of what has to be one of the coolest and most elaborately conceived boss fights in the history of the franchise.
And at this point, you haven't even been playing the game for 10 hours yet. Wow.
Soundtracks like this trip me out. Not even necessarily because of the creativity or the quality, but because of the sheer amount of music happening. The music in this game doesn't sit still. It is constantly changing. And I'm not sure I can say that about any other game I've ever played. Something different is constantly hitting your ears. And the only weak part about it to me is that some of what hits your ears is so good you want to hear it again. And the game's like, nah, sorry, I've got something else for you. So we've talked a lot about the big bombastic shit. But even in these softer moments, variety and spontaneity abound. At this point, for example, you've spent approximately the past 2 hours of the game hearing different renditions of Aerith's theme, with a variety of strings, wind, and piano intermixed. Now at this point, we hear the excess drop out, and the piano gravitate towards more minor tonalities.
Want to overstay my welcome.
The music in this game is as alive and moving as the story itself. Literally around every corner, you hear something new. There's this part where you fight the bandits in the sewers, and you hear the oppressed. You might remember this tune as what played in Wall Market in the OG game. But anyway, here we can see it retains its relaxed ska style.
Oh, a likely story.
Okay, what do you want?
Then out of nowhere, it gets sampled and reshuffled into this crazy techno remix. This game does not let your ears get acclimated, and I love that about it. I found myself often audibly asking, I wonder what they did with such and such tune in this game. It's been a while since I've enjoyed a game soundtrack this much. What's up with this Kingdom Hearts 1 music playing during the Reno fight? Finally, let's look at thematic development. Now, I'll have to speak pretty generally on this, because literally all throughout the game, various themes get reshuffled, often in combination with each other. That ominous yet elegant Shin-Ra theme, for example, based entirely on an ascending minor scale, can be found all throughout the game.
In response, a disaster warning has been issued in sectors 1 and 8.
The sewer music appears to be a newer rendition of Lurking in the Darkness from the OG game. With the same kind of angular, altered chord progression, except, dramatized. Isn't that cool how they took such a mellow melody and transmuted it into something so intense? even though you're always hearing something new, you often hear it in conjunction with something familiar. Now, let's take a look at what they did with the Genova theme. Originally, when you're breaking into the headquarters for the Aerith rescue mission, an appropriately ominous version of the Shinra theme plays, and in it, we can hear the Genova ostinato interwoven. In Genova's theme, there's two ostinatos, the higher one that the theme starts with, and the lower one that serves as the bass line. Both are constructed from the same collection of notes, D, F, A, and B flat. So this collection of notes is pretty characteristic in the context of Final Fantasy VII. D, F, A, and B flat equals Genova, or Hojo, who in the new game is often accompanied by Genova's motif like we've talked about. However, you don't actually fight Genova in the first Midgar arc of the OG game. As we've seen, that's not the case here, so let's see how they decided to employ her music. I've already talked about the endgame boss rush, all staple endgame enemy configurations of Square Enix. Now, like I mentioned, the Genova fight was one of those moments growing up that absolutely blew my mind. And so I was waiting the whole game for this, just to see if they'd put it in here. And you get there, and this monstrosity appears, and you're like, could it be? Genova? I get to fight you? And the music here does the same evolving thing we've been talking about, where it blossoms into the original version. Except this time it was even better, because I was already keyed into this, so the whole time I'm wondering, will it evolve into the classic theme? It starts as this very slow, vaguely recognizable rendition of the material.
That's it!
In the second stage, the melody materializes, but it's still way more dramatic and orchestral than the original.
Bring it! I can't believe this. Okay, now.
And I'm thinking, they won't do it. They didn't do it. And then in the last stage of the fight, what do I do? Tears. Actual tears when I heard it for the first time. Not only did they see fit to write awesome new orchestral arrangements for the songs, but they also saw fit to give you redone versions in the configurations that you recognize. You get both. You get a new artistic spin on the original music, but then you get something more faithful too. It's the best. It's just the best. So, yeah, this battle was a treat. The Rufus fight I did not enjoy as much. Don't get me wrong, this was the one I was expecting, and it was cool and all seeing him rocket around with his guns and parrying the Buster Sword and whatnot, but it definitely got a little annoying at times. The scoring in this fight, however, was uniquely cool. It starts off with the boss vamp, but the beat on it is taken from the Shinra theme.
From the Shinra Emergency Operations Center. Unidentified intruders have detonated a bomb.
Let's get this over with.
Don't say that.
Isn't that cool? So here, we have not only reshuffling of melodic motifs, but instrumental and rhythmic ones as well. And the whole rest of the time, different sections of the Shinra theme and the boss theme answer each other in canon. Lastly, I want to mention the Arsenal fight very briefly, whose music is mostly a super heavy version of the boss theme. But there was something cool that happened in there.
No need to panic.
Did you catch that? It was the classic Final Fantasy battle bass line, which sounds super dorky when I say it like that. But that's only because it is. It's a simple vamp that precedes a lot of the earlier Final Fantasy battle themes, which were often in A minor. You'll also hear it in 9, purposefully, because 9 was meant to be a return to form after the more modern stylings of 7 and 8. And 15, where it was included as one of many awesome nods to the glorious musical heritage of the series. And apparently this one. absolutely terrific. More than anything else, the thing I was really surprised at with this game was how much the new character development ended up making me actually care.
You worry too much. I'm not some princess who needs to be coddled. Shit.
As we get older, it's really easy to get jaded as studios we grew up with grow up themselves, and sometimes put out things that don't necessarily line up with our personal perception of them. I think I'm not alone when I say that when I heard this game was only covering the events in Midgar, I was a little disappointed. I thought, why not just redo the whole thing and put it out as one game? I'm sure money was a consideration. Just because I love Square Enix doesn't mean I'm oblivious to the fact that video games, like anything, are an enterprise. But they're an enterprise that a lot of studios often infuse with a lot of love and creativity, and clear dedication to their fan base and the stories they've created that those fans love. This game is no exception.
Well, that's all I really have to say. I gotta say though, it would be cool if you could just step through a portal, fight your worst enemy, and rectify every mistake you've ever made. That would be awesome. Not gonna lie. That would be cool. What the hell? Who are you and where am I? You know who I am. You know why I'm here. Prepare yourself for the battle. Going back to sleep. Oh man, what a crazy dream. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's no way. There's no way in the world. There's just no way. It worked. I never fell out of shape. I went to the nexus of creation, and now my mistakes don't count. How many other mistakes did I make? They don't count now. It doesn't matter. I never fell out of shape. My God. Oh 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 my God. So, I guess I should go train competitively again. After I'm done catching up.